Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
If you're a regular listener to the show, you know I'm a longtime friend of the CMO Club, which is how I first got interested in interviewing senior marketers in the first place. And for the past 10 years or so, I've gone to club dinners and summits and sought out those folks that I thought had the insight-rich stories to tell. Along the way, I ran into a gentleman by the name of Greg Welch, who shared my preoccupation with these same people, having started up the marketing officer practice for Spencer Stuart. I think it was like 16 years ago. And Spencer Stuart, if you don't know, is one of the largest global executive search firms, and they're headquartered here in Chicago, where I happen to be today. And what I found amazing about Greg is that when he led a panel discussion of world-class CMOs, I'm talking about some of the best in the business, they were uncharacteristically deferential. Almost like the old E.F. Hutton ads, when Greg Welch talks, CMOs listen. So, and when we're done with this episode, I think you'll understand why. So, Mr. Welch, it's an honor to have you on the show.
It's a pleasure to have you here, and I only can wish my children would listen with the same deference.
It doesn't work that way.
It does not work that way.
It doesn't work that way. They might listen to you later on. It's funny how much smarter you get between their freshman year in college and when they graduate.
I'm hoping.
So we're going to do a modified version of Renegade Rapid Fire. Let's start with first, what do you see as the primary role of the CMO?
Wow. So the role definitely has evolved over the last 20 years that I've been doing search. It clearly has what we would refer to as a seat at the table today. CEOs and boards count on effective marketing to create demand in the market. I think of it a little bit differently from a leadership perspective, and no doubt job one is to be orchestra leader, chief cheerleader, inspiration provider, and glue across the enterprise, hoping that in the end, if you do all those things right, you have a brand that matters, a brand that people care about and bring close, and ideally somebody that can create something that's new and differentiated in the market.
So that's a lot. We're going to unpack that a little bit. I love the notion of the CMO as the sort of orchestrator and inspirational person who brings the company together. But that doesn't sound like the same person who would necessarily create demand for the organization. And that ability to be a cheerleader is quite a bit different than that ability to, say, have leads show up in the pipeline.
Yeah. You know, as you well know from your work, the science and technology behind what makes great marketing has changed as rapidly as anything I've seen anywhere across any function. At Spencer Stuart, our focus is primarily on finding great leaders. And there are some interesting examples of people that happen to be great leaders that they said, can we coach them up, teach them up on the skill part that they need to know? You know, it is not uncommon today to find a CMO that has thousands of people. How could you possibly be an expert on all things PhD or AI or transparency or content, or I could go on and on and on. You need to have people that are functional experts in specific areas, and we need someone that can cast the vision and know how to pull it together. Most marketers, the best ones I know, are great leaders at their core who happen to be gifted marketers who can inspire people to do what they do best.
And I totally get it that the leadership thing is the number one characteristic. And that's a profound moment for, just to pause on and think. And we both know Antonio Lucio, who I have, seen. I think I saw you interview him, and I actually interviewed him for my book. And he just reeks leadership.
Yeah, Antonio Lucio, we just placed, as you may know, as the CMO at Facebook. My partner, Tom Seklow, and Nancy Ehrenberg, and I just finished that project. Incredibly proud of that. He is the perfect guy at the right opportunity It was a massive global search. We looked at a lot of different people, and in the end, and Antonio would be one of those rock stars, absolute best of the best in my book. He's elegant, he's smart, he's thoughtful. He brings a great background from the likes of PepsiCo on a global basis. He cares personally about diversity and equality in all he does. He reeks of it, and it's just so powerful when he opens his mouth. But here's a guy who, while he was at Visa, ran HR as well. So he is somebody that understands the full enterprise. He's an adult. He's mature. He happens to be a gifted marketer, and the work he's done most recently in HP is extraordinary, and we're optimistic and hopeful he's going to do the same thing at Facebook.
Well, it's funny and I'm thinking about when you ask a great CEO what their job is, it's almost always set the vision, put the team together, and then decide where the resources will go, right? What resources should be applied to where. That's the role of the CEO. But it sounds very much like, and when you hear Antonio talk, he says exactly the same thing, right? Set the vision, build the team, apply the resources, and then get out of the way.
He, I can go on and on about him, but he has this authentic leadership style that is transparent. And part of why I think he was so successful in his career, and we expect he will be at Facebook, is he has a way to bring people along with him. And that's the CIO, the CFO, and the head of HR. He's hard not to like. And odd as that sounds, that characteristic actually matters. I would argue it matters if you're the CFO as well as the CEO. But he has that incredible spark in his eye, and he believes that as a team we can go further. And we're just super excited to sit back and watch what he does now.
So the emphasis here is on chief and officer and less on marketing, at least in this moment, for this moment of this part of the conversation. Sure. But let's talk about marketing and the training that one needs. It's funny, as I'm sitting in your office, I'm seeing a book that says the old rules of marketing don't apply. I got to believe that in a lot of these people like Antonio, there are fundamental parts of marketing that they understand. They know how the pieces put together to actually drive not just brand, but demand.
If you think about the kind of people that I looked for 20 years ago, and I think I've done 500 CMO searches, that has changed dramatically. And it used to be that we'd say, which part of Cincinnati did you start in, at Procter or at Pepsi or at Kraft? I loved early CPG. We found people that jumped out of those into whether it's a restaurant or hospitality or financial services or healthcare. I love that combination of experiences. Today, it's a new day. Every single mandate, when I sit down with a CEO and I say, what's keeping you up at night? Where do you want your marketing organization to go? What ails you? It all evolves around, what we call modern, digital, social, mobile, and performance marketing. And the fact of the matter is, if you grew up at Procter & Gamble in the 1980s, performance marketing wasn't around, wasn't evolved. I still think the things that they brought about analytics, about leadership, on the way you get things done, all of that is still entirely applicable. The fact of the matter is, the performance marketing that's going on in Silicon Valley and in New York City and in other key cities right now is dramatically different. And some of these more senior CMO candidates and CMOs didn't grow up in that. So they're rapidly learning. We often have boards that say, I've got a friend that would like to learn more about SEO. Can you explain that to them? And by the way, do you mind if I listen in? Great CMOs are educating their boards, they're educating organizations about it, and it's a new day. As you would expect, I'm super excited like you are about some of these disruptive new technologies that sit in the valley. The fact of the matter is, when I really do a deep dive on those executives' knowledge of what you and I would view to be classical marketing principles, they're light. They're also often very light on leadership. And as I see a couple gray hairs on both our heads here, there's something to be said about taking some laps around the track. And there is a new breed of smart, aggressive, really impressive young talent that don't quite have the leadership experiences yet and don't know the full enterprise business yet, which I worry about on behalf of our clients. When we take a risk on a, quote, young up-and-comer that has done fabulous things building a brand, can they parlay that into a larger, more complex enterprise? That's what keeps me up at night.
Okay, so if we were sort of putting together the formula for the prospective CMO of a large company down the road, they wanted to do that job in 15 years or 10 years. They need to have the digital side. They need to understand all those words, the language, how those pieces, how to build the demand gen. And they need to understand brand and how to build brand. And they need leadership opportunities. And so it's really those three that would, in some ways, set this individual up for being hired as a first-time CMO.
Yeah, I think that's right. But there's, like in any sport, there's intangibles that the great ones are all going to have. Some of it may be that sparkle in the eye that I referenced with Antonio. Consider it to be a best athlete that could play multiple positions. The young, smart, incredibly impressive executives that I know that will be tomorrow's CMOs are the ones that are curious. They realize that God gave them 2 ears and 1 mouth, and they use them in that ratio. They've got to be great learners, and they've got to be great listeners. And the smart ones, and what I love about the CMO Club and some of these other organizations, is the opportunity to learn from those that have been there before. I always recommend a aspiring CMO to think about who's on my personal board of directors. How can I have 3 or 4 people that I can pull close to say, Drew, would you be willing to invest in me? And can you become a go-to guy for me for help, sometimes feedback that I maybe don't want to hear, but I got to be, you can't handle the truth, but you need to be able to hear that truth, and to learn about managing a P&L, and to learn about, how in the world do you run a customer service call center, to learn about what great loyalty looks like. And if you don't have that and support, I think going it alone, you're going to have trouble.
I love that. Okay, so get your personal board of directors. We're going to take a break, and while we're taking that break, you can go think about your personal board of directors. And when we come back, we'll talk about mine. No, we'll talk more about CMOs. Okay, stay with us.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers. Interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. Top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Greg Welch, who leads the Chief Marketing Officer practice at Spencer Stuart. And we've been talking about some of the characteristics of highly successful CMOs, and I might argue these are the characteristics of highly successful leaders. You look at Lincoln on Leadership or Leadership on Lincoln, whatever that book is, by the way. If you haven't ever read that book, listeners, go buy it now. It's just brilliant. And I'll include it in the show notes, but Lincoln was a great listener. Listening creates empathy. Listening also creates the opportunity to tell stories, which is fascinating. And
and Lincoln, besides all of that, one of the things he was great at doing was pulling his enemies close to him. and I assure you that no matter what organization you're in, you're going to have somebody that's sandpaper to you. I keep sandpaper as a bookmark, and I always think about the people that I need to improve my relationship with. And I cannot think of a single great CMO that hasn't figured out how to spend time and build enduring relationships with their peers. So the idea of managing the marketing team with the door closed is gone. That's a death march. Instead, when I sit with great CMOs, and it's fascinating, I say, hey, Drew, pull out your diary. Tell me about your week. Well, this wasn't a typical week. Well, there's never a typical week. But the great ones seem to say, well, every Tuesday morning I have breakfast with the CFO. I do a check-in with my boss at a staff meeting on Monday, and then I typically try to spend time in retail with one of our salespeople on Friday afternoons or what it may be. The great, can it be ironic or not that the great ones seem to continually build great relationships with the rest of the organization?
Yeah, it's one of the sort of secrets that to a new CMO is I see if you can get your office right next door to the CMO and volunteer to teach him marketing so that they can teach you finance, and you have this quid pro quo. And it's a wonderful way when you ask someone to teach you. It's a good way to make them a friend.
If you think about and you can imagine, we track CMO's performance in tenure. It's down to about 44 months, so still fairly volatile. when I look at certain sectors like the restaurant industry as an example, QSR has been known to be quite volatile, lots of movement. And part of where I think as I trace back, why is this happening? Well, what would happen is the CMO historically would stand in front of the franchise owners and the field operators and say, here's the special promotion that we're going to run. It's going to be great. And here's what we expect. And here's how this new item is not going to be that difficult for you to pull off operationally. And then the next month they get up in front of them and say, oh, I didn't do what we said. And consequently, you lost faith. So one of the key tenets, I think, of great leaders is this authentic and transparent, leading with data, having a point of view, having backbone is important, but also to be the guy or the gal who the CFO says, you know what, I'm following him because I believe what he's saying. He's not trying to sell us a bill of goods, and he's being balanced about it. You know, the day of convincing somebody this is going to be great and it's the shiniest happy toy ever, you just can't do that anymore.
It's interesting. And so a couple things came to mind. You mentioned a study that you do. You've been doing this annual study, and where you study tenure. And by the way, we'll link to the release on that in the show notes. I thought that was interesting on a couple of levels. One, tenure has always been a topic of conversation for CMOs. Some studies I've read, it's, when they're looking at 1,000, I think you were looking at the top 100 in terms of spending. It's like 30 months, 24 to 30 months versus average CEO at 7 years. I might argue that part of this is that they're not very good at sort of aligning expectations from the beginning. And then also, I think a lot of CMOs, and this is aren't really good at doing their job.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. So even, and it's interesting, you can imagine I've been doing this for a long time, and my peeps, if you will, the CMO community broadly, are my friends. These are smart people. I care about their spouses. In some cases, I know their children. They're smart, bright, certainly look the part and have everything going for themselves, yet they're failing. They're losing market share. They made a big bet on something that didn't pay off. They ran afoul in a political way inside their organization. And so part of what I'm trying to do is to say, how can I spend time with this group? I've got the incredible blessing of having a ringside seat, watching what frustrates CEOs and living with the CMO people to say, how can we make this better? I have opted to say, I'm going to be one of you. We need to figure out, 23 months tenure selfishly is good for Spencer Stuart and for me. That's not what we want. We're bigger than that. And we're trying to figure out, how do we get a CMO off to a great start? How do we ensure that he or she has the right skills needed for the job? And importantly, how can I look at a CEO and say, listen, I want to be very practical about what you expect him or her to get done in the first year, what cannot get done. And then I need to call my people and say, Drew, I'd like you to consider this job. And here's why I think it makes sense for you. And you can imagine when you have a personal relationship with the would-be candidates, certainly you do with the client. My goal is to lay out the carpet and make sure we do it right. It's a difficult job. The kitchen is hot. I've been saying that for a long time. I do believe that the CMO chair today is one of the most influential. My good friend Stephen Quinn, who we placed at Walmart many years ago, used to say, whoever owns the customer will win. And he meant in the building. And I think the CMO is in a perfect seat to have a deep relationship with the CIO about how we're going to think about relationship management, with the CFO about what P&L and pricing elasticity looks like. And so the great CMOs are taking that chair in an authentic way and driving the agenda to drive growth for the company.
A lot to think about on that one. And I saw you introduce Stephen Quinn at the CMO. I think it was the first Hall of Fame, the CMO Club Hall of Fame dinner. And he had such a classic career path at big companies and learned the training. The thing that I have noticed is probably the thing that has hurt CMOs the most, particularly on a B2B level, is they're expected in a 3 to 6 month period to radically change the demand generation engine. And the truth is, in order to do that, you need a commercial insight. You need something that, that is possible. You need to find out whether the product is broken, because sometimes it's not just the message and how you're going to market. There are issues. There could be issues at customer service and so forth. And so they are expected to take the organization without changing any structural elements of the organization, and simply through marketing change, customer perceptions. And I think that is where this rub happens really quickly. So then they throw out what was currently there, and they put in a new sort of demand generation promise using the same channels that they were using before, perhaps with a little more marketing automation. And it doesn't have a material impact on the business. And so to me, that says they're accepting a challenge that they can't succeed in.
Yeah. Oftentimes it's, you think about when you buy a car. Most people buy a car every 3 or 4 years. Who's going to win that discussion? You or the sales guy on the lot? You're going to lose that. And in the case of changing jobs, one of the things that I've watched happen over the years is buyers, the candidates, are becoming more savvy. And if you don't properly evaluate the way that CEO rolls, his or her track record, the resources you're going to be able to have, and if you don't think you can win, by all means, you shouldn't be taking this job. I mean, I learned a long time ago, winning is really hard. Putting the ball in the hoop is difficult. And so part of what my team and I do is to try to look and say, let's look at Drew's track record. Has he been successful of doing that in the past? Today more than ever, my ability to evaluate somebody's performance is unbelievable, which means, there's no more phony stuff on the resume, because we will know, and we will know not only reputation by what people tell us, but I can look at market share. I can look at spend efficiency. I can look at, the KPIs that you're looking at. And so consequently, part of what's happened is we're beginning to look in new places for talent.
Interesting.
And so the traditional old suspects that might have seemed likely is not necessarily where we can go, because they may not be as talented or as gifted as what we thought they were.
Interesting. You can run, but you can't hide.
Yeah. It's made our job more difficult. Right. And hence I'll call it service after the sale. I mean, the amount of time that I spend with my friends and placements and our clients to make sure that you build momentum early on. You need to have a plan. You need to make sure you've got buy-in. You need to quickly build relationships. And the fact of the matter is, and you said it, boards and CEOs are expecting quick work. Get me one of those modern marketers and we're off to happy land and I can satisfy my board. It doesn't work that way. And so it's very complicated. And behind the scenes, if you haven't been working on your new job, 60 days before you start, you're probably behind.
Okay. So we're going to take a quick break. One of our phones is ringing. I think that's mine. But we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to talk about the ever-growing role of the CMO.
Renegade Thinkers Unite is brought to you by Social Media Explorer, the website that explores the world of social media from the inside out. Great advice from today's leading social media columnists and experts at socialmediaexplorer.com. That's socialmediaexplorer.com.
Okay, we're back, and my guest is Greg Welch and Spencer Stuart, and we've been talking about the role of the CMO, the ever-expanding role of the CMO, and is there a point where a CMO might be taking too much on? And I mentioned Manny Rodriguez as an example, who identified customer experience at UC Health as an issue that needed to be addressed, and next thing you know, he's responsible for it. So how does this play out? I mean, is there a limit to what a CMO should take on?
Well, so we have what I refer to as CMO plus. And so imagine you're a 1 or 2 time CMO and I call you about an opportunity. Now there's a different level of, well, tell me about the breadth of that job. What other groups does it have? And so naturally CMOs are beginning to take over areas like Manny in customer service or customer experience. Oftentimes they manage the journey from the greeter when you walk in a store to the way the website looks. We've seen many CMOs beginning to take over e-commerce, which is, particularly in the B2B world, it's a relatively small business, but growing. We've seen that continue to grow. I think the CMO is well positioned to do that. It used to be that CMOs, the right answer to my question when I would say, tell me about your longer term aspirations, were to be CEO. There's now this new breed, which I love and embrace, of what I call closet CMOs. Mike Linton's a great example of this, somebody who's been an incredible CMO. He's at Farmers Insurance now, but ex-Best Buy. Absolutely one of the very, very best. And he finally came out of the closet and said, I love being a marketer. I don't have any aspirations to be a CEO, although he certainly could if he wanted to. And as we think about how, if in fact you do want to do more, how do you get operations experience? How do you get international experience? How do you work in an area that you're unfamiliar with? And that requires you to take on more. I think CMOs are well positioned to do that. I've got one of my favorite former CMOs was tapped to go be a GM of a very large business in Europe. And after I talked to him about it, I said, did you feel ill-prepared in any way? And his comment was, on the finance side, borrowing money, figuring out how to finance the inner workings, I didn't have the foundation, and that was a soft spot. So I encourage young or aspiring marketers that want to build their bridge underneath them. How do you make sure you've got the fundamentals? Finance would be right at the top of that list for me. How do you become more savvy around technology? As an example, at Facebook, they use this term called, I need somebody that knows how to touch the metal. And what they mean by that is somebody that can market the product but understands how to go deep and have a conversation with an engineer about what the technology and the implications are, and will you be credible in that conversation. That doesn't just happen. It goes back to being curious, being a learner, and getting people that can help you get up to speed on that.
So interesting. Is there a point where it breaks? And for example, I was talking to a CMO the other day, and she had identified HR and recruiting as a challenge and was going to volunteer to take that over. And I wondered whether that was a good idea or not, because, there's so much downside of maintenance of HR that has, isn't about marketing. And even if you get it right, it won't have a material impact on your marketing performance necessarily.
Yeah, it depends. If somebody were to ask, should I go grab, is that a land grab? Can I pick up HR? Would that be good for me? It depends what you want to do. It depends what the situation is, how effective your marketing team is. Is it a development? I don't know about the particular situation. HR would not necessarily be at the top of the list for me if I were to say if there's areas you could expand. Part of this is, do you jump out of bed in the morning and are you excited about what you're doing? Are you passionate about it? Are you learning? The very best CMOs I know are the ones that are thrilled with what they're doing and excited about it. I think all of us are HR leaders. And if you're not putting a hug, not literally, on your team, then you're not being a good CMO. So people are at the absolute forefront of that. I think that's all of our jobs, to make sure our people are engaged, happy, know that you've got their back, etc. But there are a lot of other areas like e-commerce, which is exciting, like customer service, which is a big operational job, call center management. I mean, there's many areas that somebody could logically go. And I love that when we expand into what we call CMO plus jobs. We've got a large client I'm serving now in Europe, and they've just expanded the CMO job to include about 80 flagship stores where somebody will own that. And that makes it pretty exciting when you call a sitting CMO and say, I also want you to run 80 to 100 stores, and the people that go along with that. I love the notion of creating demand for your product, delivering it, the operational hands-on and the movement of it. That's an exciting CMO job.
Yeah, no, I definitely, and of course you need to have those skill sets and know how those things work, which is interesting. I always felt like, remember years ago I interviewed Terry Funk Graham, who was a long time at Jack in the Box, and for her last 10 years of her long time at Jack in the Box, she had product reporting to her. And I thought, and for QSR, that's so important because, every 3 months campaign is really about the new product that will sort of create a little bit of dissonance out there. You go, oh, I didn't know you had that, even though you're going to go and buy the Super Taco at 12 o'clock at night anyway. But the new products were essential to marketing. And so that made a lot of sense to me. Are there other areas when we expand the CMO role, if you were to advise one, where you'd say, that's a really smart thing for you to do because it will have a material impact on your first goal, which is to drive brand and drive demand?
It depends on the business and the service, but the e-commerce side is one that I think is both logical. I've seen it as a way to become a true P&L manager. That seems logical. The restaurant example is a great one. I love the industry. We've placed CMOs at Dunkin' and Potbelly and Carl's Jr. and Jimmy John's and Arby's, and I can go on. And one of the exciting pieces about that industry, and it's riddled with a bunch of packaged goods people who have said, let me learn about the pace of retail, the immediacy of did that plan, promotion, pricing, experience work, and the whole idea that you can get into culinary. Right. That has been a natural one for that industry. There aren't many analogs in other sectors as effective as the one you just brought up in restaurants, but that's a great one.
So we interestingly talking about vertical markets and that specialty zone. Do you see from a recruiting standpoint a big difference between a CMO who's prepared to be a great B2B CMO versus a great B2C CMO?
I think the B2B CMOs, the great ones, have always been probably more commercially minded than CMOs in consumer companies. And I say that, and I'll pause not to be critical of this group at all, but it's not about the pretty ads. I think CMOs with big ad budgets have always been, they're the ones with, beads, in their door, and they're thinking about the big ads, and can I win an Effie this year? That has unfairly brought down many consumer CMOs who didn't deserve that rap. But there's been a little bit of that all along, and I feel like the big B2B CMOs, many of them were commercial and or had business development or sales responsibilities earlier on and took on marketing. I love the challenge in your world at Renegade of how can B2B companies become more aggressive marketers. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. We're seeing companies become more and more savvy, and it's exciting, and content's right at the center of that.
It really is. It's fun and it's interesting. And Greg and I were talking about this before the show about what we're calling the content nightmare, which is everybody's rushed to content and they're slaves to this content calendar, and it's just piling up, and it's not driving business. And there's no sense of how to fix it. And part of that, to me, is that a lot of the content that's being created isn't additive, and it's not additive because there's not a big idea, a big commercial insight behind the brand, which a packaged good marketer would never allow to happen, which is fascinating, right? It comes back to, do you understand the core of a brand and what that means?
And if you can control the way it looks, where you decide to play, where you're credible, I'm excited about the potential for B2B marketing in general. I think they're playing catch up in some regards, but nobody's got it figured out. I mean, there's a reason we're busy, and these are smart people that are well intended, trying to do well. We as a group need to band together to figure out how we can help each other.
So let's think about the CMO of the future 10 years from now, just for fun. Are they, the ultimate data geeks, or the ultimate sort of customer-centric brand person, as there's this left brain, right brain thing, is this combo person, superhuman person possible?
Yeah, I worry a lot about this. I think we've perhaps gone too far on the performance side in the last perhaps couple of years. We went from pretty shiny ads, what I would call magic, creating provocative thoughts or humor on traditional channels, to really what I need is analytical savvy. The fact of the matter is all of our clients want it all. I think we will find a balance. I do think the ante to get in the game is you better know the basic principles of building quality, sustainable brands and the creative that goes with that. But I'm still going to err on the side of the, what I would call just performance side, on the analytical rigor. As well as I do, or better perhaps, what's going on with media buying and the right message to the right person. I'm going to refer it as exciting. I say it's fluid when it scares me to death and it's, choppy waters ahead. But you know what? If the kitchen's too hot, you shouldn't be in it. The reality is it's going to continue to change. I'm choosing to say this is going to be exciting. Hold on and let's do the best we can. but performance and analytics, what I would call the science versus the art, are going to continue to reign over the next handful of years for sure.
And they certainly resonate with the board and a CEO who loves that predictable sort of, if you will, demand generation revenue stream. One quick thought: I interviewed Jonathan Beamer recently of Monster, and he's been on the job, I guess, 9 months, and his assessment, and frankly the whole assessment, has been that the brand disappeared. Interestingly, they were so focused on demand generation and digital that people stopped talking about them. And this was a brand that was built on Super Bowl ads. So interestingly enough, here's a digital ad with all the digital company who's going back on television.
Yeah, it's, time will tell. There's provocative campaigns that come out, and we'll see what works. I mean, that's an interesting company as an example when you think, essentially in similar work that what we do. But there's so many disruptors, and if you're not thinking about what's around the corner, you could find yourself in a very difficult spot. I mean, if you look at what LinkedIn as an example has done behind the scenes, in that world, I mean, it's extraordinary. And I don't know who tomorrow's LinkedIn is going to be, but I'm worrying about it every day.
Interesting. Yes. Worrying about being disrupted, even though you guys are well positioned as leaders in this world. Okay. So, let's just wrap this up with, two do's and a don't. For future, for wannabe CMOs, 2 do's and a don't in the next couple of years.
First one is, if you don't already have a personal group of advisors, I'd call it your personal board. Do that. I built mine 20 years ago, and it's evolved over time. As I told people when I called them, it doesn't pay well. I'll buy you lunch once a quarter, but I'd like you to be able to take my call, and will you invest in me? So that's one thing you should do. The other thing is just this playbook of building those solid relationships with your peers. I would ask you to really look at yourself in the mirror and think about where you're spending your time. Are you a firefighter trying to keep up with your email, which we all fall prey to? Or are you the one that's proactive to sit down with the CFO and have that conversation you'd rather not about how are we doing? What do you think I need to be doing differently? What do you want to see from me? I love that we did a piece years ago called "What Do You Want From Me?" And I think the very notion of asking your peers what they want and expect, can avoid the downfalls that many great people have fallen into, which is the minute that promotion didn't work, the CFO throws you under the bus. And if you don't have a deep personal relationship with your peers, you're in trouble. The thing you shouldn't do is, and I say this as I'm being taped on a broadcast, is don't be that CMO that's just doing the panel after panel discussion, putting yourself in the spotlight, because I can assure you that your head of HR, your CEO, and whatever is like, oh, Drew's on another panel. People don't like it.
Yeah.
It may be good for your own brand, but your people internally roll their eyes at that.
That's interesting, and it's really good.
But if I call you and I need you on a panel, please do it for me.
Yes, exactly.
But
there are points. It's important to be out there, but it's not to be out there. And we all know those CMOs who are way ahead in terms of building their personal brand and spending so much time on it that they have created some bad situations for themselves and have a reputation that precedes them.
The reality is these jobs are so complex today, you can't do it alone. And so whether it's CMO Club or Marketing 50 or the Forbes Group or the ANA, I love all of them, and people should go to learn. You need to build a group of external partners, whether it's your agency partner or consultants that can help you on particular issues. You need to bring in that expertise, and you need to be a sponge, and you need to find out, what are the best ones doing.
Interesting. I love that. Okay. Well, that's a great place to wrap up. It's funny. So, this is episode 99. Episode 100 is with my personal board of directors, who was my father.
Oh, fantastic.
Really. So, and we were laughing. I had breakfast with him because he's in Chicago, as well. And, I laughed and I said, so episode 100 is running in a few weeks. And he says, I don't know if it's any good or not. And I said, don't worry, Dad, it'll be fun.
Well, congratulations on 100 episodes. That in itself is fantastic. We appreciate what you're doing for the industry.
Thank you. All right. Well, to those of you who are listening in and have made it through all the way to the end, I'm always appreciative of that, and just want to thank you. And if you've enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend. Sharing is caring. Write a review. And as always, until next week, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite, but it doesn't end there. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.